Okay, as you can see, we have another book review, and a couple of people may notice the gentleman in the book. Maybe a couple. I don't know, he's not very well known. Okay. This was one of the NRA's recommended readings. It's a very, very old book. It's a couple of decades old, but there's like the new edition that's been republished, and they add things to it. Yeah. Now, before I start the review, I'm going to say something that's not mentioned in the book. There's a channel called The Great War, and it's about World War One. And there are historians on this channel, and they do week by week, like 100 years ago this week, this battle took place. 100 years ago this week, this country was invaded. And they go on the 100th anniversary of like everything that happened in World War One. They have a partnership with Sea and Arsenal, who is a Milsurp curator, and they did a couple collaborations where the Great War and Sea and Arsenal would do a combined video, and Sea and Arsenal would help them explore like every gun used by this army during World War One. Every gun used by this army, and there are very, very long and detailed videos. Now, one video that Sea and Arsenal did on their own, separate from the Great War video, was the Remington Model 10. Now, the 1897 was a very, very successful shotgun, invented by the man himself. Remington ordered a man named John Peterson, P-E-D-E-R-E-S-E-N, whatever, who was 26 years Mr. Browning Jr., to make a better rifle, a better shotgun than the 1887, and it was called Remington Model 1910. And it did not have an exposed hammer, and he closed up a couple of holes. I'll put the video down below if I can. Very, very, very detailed video. Now, Mr. Browning considered this gentleman to be the greatest gun designer in history. Everyone on the planet considers Mr. Browning to be the unquestioned master. You can ask anybody that's ever shot a gun who was the greatest, and they will all say Mr. Browning. Okay? He is the unquestioned greatest. However, the man himself considered a man young enough to be his son to be the greatest. So he was a very, very modest man. Now, you've seen videos and TV shows, cartoons, about time travel, where they say the slightest thing, if you go back in time and you change one little thing, you could screw things up. And there was one episode of The Simpsons Halloween special where Homer went back in time and squashed a bug, and then went back to the present day and changed the world. If a gentleman in the 1840s did not break his gun, Hitler would have taken over the world. Okay, now, what does that mean? Okay, the gentleman broke his gun, and he went to a gunsmith named Jonathan Browning to fix the gun for him. And Jonathan Browning had a touch of mysticism, and this gentleman convinced Jonathan Browning to convert to the new faith, Mormonism. I guess that was kind of like the Jehovah's Witness of the day, So this gentleman basically brainwashed Jonathan Browning to join the Mormon religion, which was very controversial in its early days. And Mr. Browning joined the Mormon religion, and at that time, not today, but at that time, the Mormon religion heavily emphasized bigamy. And Mr. Jonathan Browning married 2 other wives simultaneously, so he had 3 simultaneous wives. And the first wife of the first child of the second marriage was John Moses. Now, John Moses had a very, very, very limited education. Very, very limited. And they explain this in the book. Back then, school was, you went to a room and the teacher taught you. There was no curriculum. There was no anything, just the teacher taught you. And all teachers were independent. They taught you what they wanted to teach you, and oftentimes they were just barely educated themselves. And John Browning went through what they call the sixth reader, and his teacher told him, you know, you're as smart as I am now. I guess you graduated. You don't have to come back anymore. And that was Mr. Browning's graduation from school. He was barely in puberty. Now we've heard several things about when did Mr. Browning make his first gun. Some guys say 11, some guys say 12, some guys say 13, some guys say 14. There were several different guns. When Mr. Browning was 11, his younger brother Matt and he took some gunpowder from their father, which was punishable by death back then, and they went chicken hunting. And they went chicken hunting with a flintlock rifle he had made. He literally went to the junk pile to get parts out and make this flintlock rifle. And he was holding, had freaking wire holding it, like chicken wire holding it together, but for an 11-year-old kid, that was a big deal. Then when Mr. Browning was 13, Mountain Man came in. Mountain Man was those guys that went onto the mountains and hunted and trapped and, all the crap. The Mountain Man came in and had a shotgun that was just destroyed. And he asked Jonathan Browning, the father, to help him fix it. And Jonathan said flat out, by the time I get done fixing this, by the time you get done paying for it, you might as well buy a new gun. So the guy bought 2 new guns off Jonathan. And on the way out, he had the old broken gun. What's he going to do with it? Here you go, son. He just handed 13-year-old John Browning a gun. And John Browning, being the genius that he was at 13 years old, detail stripped the gun. He tried as hard as he could to salvage whatever parts he could. Tried to replace the parts he needed to replace. And sure enough, after a shitload of work, he got this gun going. And when he was 14, he went back to the junk pile, found a barrel preserved in beeswax. They didn't have cosmine back then, I don't think. And he took the beeswax off the barrel, realized that the guy that beeswaxed it up must have wanted to preserve it, and he decided to make a really nice gun for his brother Matt. Then when Mr. Browning was old enough, he married. His father passed away the same year, unfortunately. And there's actually an interesting story. The front picture, what do you notice? Look at the sign. You see it? Okay. Mr. Browning had this shop, and it was kind of like a sporting goods shop back then. Guns, ammunition, baseball bats, fishing gear, stuff like that. And Mr. Browning's last teacher, the one that said he graduated, came by the shop one day, and he noticed the sign. And then he went outside and he saw Matt Browning, and he said, "Where's your brother? Get him out here." And they said, "John, look at the sign. How do we spell ammunition?" And Matt ran inside, got a box of ammunition, and sure enough, AMM. And they left the sign the way it was. He left the sign with the fucking spelling. And this is the greatest genius of 2 centuries. The man who without him, this country would not exist. We would not exist as a country today if it weren't for Mr. Browning. And he can't spell fucking ammunition. And so Mr. Browning said to him, "Hey, listen, when I left school, you said I was just as smart as you now." So you fucking got him. Okay, so, and we've heard this on Tales of the Gun, if you ever watched Tales of the Gun. When Mr. Browning was 23, a man in Connecticut who was president of Winchester Rifles saw a single-shot rifle that Mr. Browning had made. One of Mr. Browning's rifles made it from the Utah Territory to Connecticut. And this individual, this gentleman who was the president of the company, you see companies today, they send their minions out into the field. They don't go out themselves. But the president of one of the largest weapons companies in the world got on a train, went from Connecticut to the Utah Territory, got off in Ogden, said, "Where's the Browning factory?" "What Browning factory?" "Oh, the Browning." "Okay, Browning, go to Main Street." So the shop didn't notice the sign, thank God, otherwise he would have walked away. walked inside, saw Matt at the counter. I'm looking for the Browning brothers. Oh, I'm a Browning brother. Okay, how about the senior Browning brother? That's John. Up the stairs. Up the stairs, looks around. See a young guy working on a lathe, comes back down. I don't see anybody. Oh, I was supposed to go in late. That's my brother John, okay. And then he got talking with Mr. Browning about the single shot. And he saw it and he bought it outright for like $10,000. And this is in the 1800s, guys. This is like the 1870s. Like Mr. Browning was 23, so this is about 1877, 1878. So, and over the next 20 years, he would come back many times to buy new things from Mr. Browning. Mr. Browning made practically the entire 1880s line, you know. All the famous lever guns from Winchester are Browning collaborations. And there were some collaborations that Winchester would buy them from Mr. Browning. And they would put them on a shelf. They didn't want to sell them. They didn't want to mass produce them. They just wanted to get them off the market. So they just bought the gun from Mr. Browning, put it in a closet, and never did anything with it. Now, when Mr. Browning made an automatic shotgun, which no one could figure out at the time except him, he made this automatic shotgun. He told Winchester flat out, I want royalties this time, and I want you to mass produce it. Winchester told him no. He said, fuck you. He walked out. He went to Remington. But while he was in the waiting room, the president of Remington literally died of a heart attack right then and there. Rather than wait around a couple weeks to see who the next guy was going to be, you know, the successor, or talk to the vice president or whatever, he just left and went to Liège, Belgium, and sold the Fabrique Nationale, and that became the Browning Auto 5. And Mr. Browning spent several more years working between Belgium, Utah, and there were some things in this book that I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't know until I read the book. During World War I, Mr. Browning was offered a commission as a colonel, an official U.S. military colonel. But because he did not go through officer candidate school, because he did not go through the ranks, he didn't really earn it, and he turned it down. There was a figure here. I actually was looking for it later. Earlier, but I couldn't find it. And then opened the book by accident. I filled in my lap. Mr. Browning was offered royalties for all the guns that he was helping make for the war effort. And the royalties would have gained him in the 19 teens $12,704,350. Now, $12 million back then bought a lot of food, bought a lot of medical supplies, bought a lot of clothes, okay, paid a lot of GI paychecks, and Mr. Browning felt that he could not live with himself knowing that he was raking it in while that money was needed elsewhere. Also, his own son, Valiant Browning, was a lieutenant with the Army. And Val was one of the first people to use the BAR and the Model 1970 War Gold. Picture here. Okay, so Mr. Browning took the first offer they gave him, which was $750,000. $750,000 in the 19 teens. And during the war, Mr. Browning was stationed on the East Coast. He was up in the New England area, between Connecticut and New York. And there were several different factories making his design. He had to go back and forth by train. He had an apartment set up. In the entire duration of the war, he was up here. He only went home to Utah once for 3 days for business and then came right back. And there were a couple of Army officers who Mr. Browning had no problem with personally. They were assigned to oversee production, which is standard for the military. But Mr. Browning would make a change to one of his designs for whatever reason. And the officers overseeing him would have to call Washington, ask all these people in Washington, these fucking bureaucrats, this, you know, blah, 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 and it would slow production down. So Mr. Browning called Washington, D.C., and spoke to a general. When was the last time you called Washington D.C. and spoke to a general? And Mr. Browning told the general, with all due respect to these young men here, these young officers, I have no problem with them at all personally, but you're making them approve everything. You're making them call you. You're making them do all this shit, and it's really getting on my nerves, and it's slowing production down. So Mr. Browning said flat out, if there's anybody in D.C. that knows my designs better than I do, he can come here and I'll go back home. And the general said, from now on, we have absolute control. And Mr. Browning could do anything he wanted, any of the factories, without any interference in the government. And this book is just riveting with all these little details. It's just so amazing. The first part of the book is about his father. The second part is about the younger him. Third part is about the older him. Fourth part is about his designs. Now, in 1926, Mr. Browning went back to Liège, Belgium again. He had a house there set up when he could live in when he was doing his work with Belgium for Big National. He and his son, Valiant, went to the factory, checked into the office, went to the floor, came back to the office, and he started having pains in his chest. And he said, son, I do believe I'm dying. And they had a doctor in the factory. And they got the doctor in the factory. He sat them to couch. They probably could have saved him with today's medicine, but he died at that time. He just died. And a lot of people know that story. But what a lot of other people don't know, and I was actually choking up reading this. I almost started crying reading this myself. When Mr. Browning passed away, the Secretary of War at that time understood his involvement in World War I, the previous decade, and he understood that without Mr. Browning, the United States would not have won World War I. And don't forget, World War II was a couple of decades away. Without him, we wouldn't win World War II either. And he ordered, when Mr. Browning's body was put on a ship back to the United States, the shipyard, they had an Army honor guard at the shipyard. And the honor guard escorted him home to Utah. And they interned him with full honors. So he was given the respect that he was due. I think he should be on a stamp. I think he should be on currency. I think there should, I think school should be closed on his birthday. This man is the most important figure in American history. On a list that includes George Washington, on a list that includes Abraham Lincoln, on a list that includes Ronald Reagan, on a list that includes Dwight Eisenhower. Without this man, we as a country would not exist. And that is what we must understand. To this very day, all NATO forces are still fighting with his stuff. Because if you look at the gas, when he made the gas systems for rifles, even though different gunsmiths have made different types of gas, carbine and Garand and M14, M16, FNFL, bullshit. Okay, even though different variations of the gas have been used, he invented the gas. Okay, even though different handguns have been made, like Glock, SIG, all that other shit. He invented the slide, the frame, the barrel. That assembly, slide, frame, barrel, recoil spring was his invention. Without these things, all forces of good would not be able to function. And the forces of evil also, while it bought from him, AK-47, stuff like that, that involves a gas system. Okay, that too could be interpreted from him, but we will not exist. Now, the back has an entire catalog of all of his inventions. Whole catalog. And I was impressed immensely by this catalog of his stuff. It's absolutely fucking incredible. They do by category: machine gun, shotgun, rifle, all the bullshit. Okay. Now what happened was, his son, when he passed away, his sons wanted to make a museum, which is still open to this day. And his sons called Winchester and asked Winchester, remember the gun, Winchester would buy his gun, lock it up in a vault, and never mass produce it. They had his original models in the factory in Winchester in the 1920s, and they took them out of the factory and sent them to the new museum. So these are on display. And it's just incredible. And they tell you what was released, what was not. He did have a bolt action 22 rifle. The 1895 lever is the magazine. The magazine fed lever, which holds 4 rounds. It's primarily a hunting gun. That is still being produced in a different form by Browning. His 22 pump is still being used by, still being made by Henry. He made a 44 caliber pump rifle, which is seen here. He made a 45 caliber, meaning 45 long coat lever. He made, most of these were never produced, by the way. They say not produced. You know, made one copy but not produced. Bought out by Winchester and not produced. Another 45 caliber lever. It's just incredible stuff here. Here's a 44 caliber lever up here. So he was very, very good into what we call today pistol carbines. You know, a pistol caliber carbine. They were a lever back then, but that's what they were. But just incredible stuff. Made a rifle for Swiss Guard. He did make a 22 bolt, believe it or not. The 5 Stevens pump. Yeah, but you get the idea, but you get to see. I mean, I'm just looking at, he made a 10 gauge pump. He made a 10 gauge lever. I mean, all this stuff here, and it's just incredible to look at. You really gotta buy this book and check it out. It's called John Browning, American Gunmaker, by John Browning and Kurt Gentry, which means some of his writing is in here. But it's just such incredible stuff. You gotta buy it. Okay, it's getting late. It's 1:11 a.m. here. Okay, thank you. Bye.